Hello there, welcome to this video. I'm Mariam. I am a scientist and I'm an artist as well, and I make these videos to kind of document the two and all in between. A couple of weeks ago I made a video talking about when I had the opportunity to become an artist, and I pretty much just messed it up, but I'm trying to do it again. And today I thought I would do a very similar video where I just sit down and talk to you a little bit about burnout, my experience with it at university, and how out of that I actually did become a full-time artist, and essentially how it helped me out as well. I've got 5 little cats in front of me right here. None of them have names yet. They are polymer clay cats that I've made. 4 of them still need painting. One of them's already been painted, but she needs a little bit of a gloss. And so if you want to name them during the video, I'd be absolutely thrilled. It's become my new little calming thing to just make polymer cats. And so let's get into the video. And so if you've clicked on this video, there might be a couple of reasons as to why you've done so. Perhaps you related to the title, or maybe you were curious. And so I just thought I would probably give the story a little bit of context, tell you a little bit about the events that led up to the burnout, as well as what I did during the burnout, and where I am today, which is a few years later. And so, let's get into it. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm not a full-time artist, I'm a part-time artist right now. I do art in my spare time, and I make usually digital drawings. However, full-time I work as a research scientist in a lab in London. I work on spina bifida and the secondary effects inside of the brain. But that's as far as I'm going, because I know how boring it can be to listen to someone else's project. If I think back really carefully, I'll realise that I was actually a really curious child growing up. I used to ask loads of different questions, like, why is the sky blue? Why does sand clump together when it's wet? Things like that. And I didn't really read many storybooks. I never could really get into them so much, but I read more like encyclopedias and those sorts of books which sort of like answer all the biology questions that you might have, or the chemistry. I used to read a lot about volcanoes for some reason, and I still remember to this day making my own Mount Vesuvius and reading so much about it. It's my favourite volcano, just in case you were wondering. And I mentioned in the video where I talked about the full-time artist parts where I was very shy, I was very sort of not very social as a child, and so that's why I turned to art. But on the other hand side, I also turned to nature. So I lived in a place that was quite surrounded by ponds and green spaces, which was lovely. It wasn't necessarily in the countryside, but the green spaces were pretty decent. And so I realised over time that during the spring, some little transparent, almost like bubbles would appear inside of the ponds, and I was so curious as to what they were. I was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, maybe even 5 actually, and I was just so fascinated by these bubbles that I realised they look a little bit like boba. Like if you have bubble tea, they look like that, and I was just so fascinated by them, and the fact that by summer they'd pretty much all just disappear. So I was super curious, and what I did was I took a little bowl. I had this orange bowl which was sort of something that I had lying around, and what I did was I filled it with water and I put it outside at around, I don't know, I think maybe February or March time, and I wanted it to also fill with those little bubbles. I waited a couple of months and I realised I wasn't going to get any of the bubbles. So what I did was I fished them out of another pond instead and put them inside of that bowl, which was cheating. And I watched them day in and day out, and I realised that these bubbles sort of hatched and out came some black squiggly things, and then these black squiggly things turned into little legs, things that were swimming with legs and arms and a tail. Then I realised they were frogs. They were absolutely tiny. If you've ever seen like a freshly hatched frog, like one of those garden frogs that you get in the UK, they're absolutely teeny tiny when they're first just sort of like starting to get out of the pond. And so that was my real first insight into science, and embryology in particular, which I carried with me. I carried this curiosity with me throughout school, and I did loads of science projects. I didn't really go to a very academic school at all, so I was just trying to get what I could out of the system, really, and just sort of reading on the side as well. And then I got into some of the more final years of schooling, which I was very excited about because I was so excited to finally be able to choose which classes I wanted to take. So I immediately dropped history because I really appreciate history, but my brain does not hold any history whatsoever. I don't know why. I just cannot remember for the life of me what happened. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. I couldn't deal with the stress anymore. And so I picked up sciences, and I also picked up art, and I also had some philosophy in there as because as well as being curious about the world, I was also curious about why I was here in the first place. I continued and I did my GCSEs, I did my A-levels in both the arts and the sciences, and I decided to go down the science route for university. So I went to a pretty good university in central London, and it's classed as one of the best for research in the world. And so I went there thinking not so much about my degree, honestly. I didn't know what I was going to get myself into. All I knew was that I liked biology, and I chose biomed instead of biology itself because it had this human element, which was, physiology, anatomy, that sort of thing. And then, to my surprise, we actually had something called developmental biology during our sort of first year of university. And I went to this class and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to expect or what I was going to encounter. I was very scattered that first couple of weeks at university, and I sat down in this massive lecture theatre hall, and this hum of people just talking and discussing things and getting to know each other suddenly just dies down and goes quiet, and the professor goes up to his stand and he stares at us, and what he does is he puts on the board this movie of a developing frog egg and it sort of hatching and all of the cell divisions that are involved in creating this tiny little creature. This struck a massive chord in me because up until that moment, that's everything that I was. It was relating me straight back into my childhood and everything that had gone on with the frogs. I was suddenly 5 or 6 years old again with my little orange bowl with some frogs in it. I was so happy. And so I continued in this class and I learned so much more about how the body develops and how embryos are essentially, shaped and all the different sort of like molecular things that goes on to create this creature. And so in our second years, we were actually able to continue in different streams and pick which classes we want to take. And so I picked the developmental route with a bit of neuroscience in it. And so that's what I continued with. I then managed to somehow graduate this university degree because by the end of it, I was exhausted. I was doing absolutely everything to burn me out, and I had experienced so much exam anxiety that I did not want to see another exam in my entire life. However, in my third and fourth year of this degree that I was doing, we got to work inside of research labs. And I remember in my third year, I did a project which was looking at the very beginnings of the formation of the brain. I got to use this electron microscope, which essentially blasts like electrons, which are incredibly tiny bits of particles. It creates this extremely high resolution of the tiniest things, and so I got to see what cells actually look like on their surfaces inside of the pretty much the very primary brain. I felt very much at home during this project. I finally realised that I wasn't someone that could just sit and learn theory and regurgitate it. I really had to be someone who was hands-on and learning things that way. So like making these cats, I couldn't just sit through a video tutorial, I have to do it at the same time. In my fourth year, I did another research project, which was actually studying the way in which the circuitry for chickens? How do I put this? So birds are able to tell where different sounds are coming from. For example, an owl is really able to work in the night because it has very sharp hearing, and it's able to tell where a mouse is or a fox is, and run after it or run away from it because of a very intricate circuit inside of its brain. This circuit uses essentially just laws of physics to decipher the angle at which things are, coming from. And so I loved this project because it had a lot of questions that I, for some reason, wanted to answer. And one of them was, how do cells move? I spent a year with the chickens and it was great. I somehow decided to do a PhD in it. So I applied for a PhD. I got the scholarship and I worked in this lab for 4 years. And this is when things really got so bad. Like it was probably one of the most interesting yet difficult times of my life. And it wasn't necessarily just the PhD and the pressure that a PhD can have, but it was also down to some very personal things that were going on inside of my life. During the PhD, I became a very independent person. I had moved out of home and I had met people, and I suddenly became very isolated by these people. And I essentially had experienced so much change, sort of ripping me from my old life into my new life, that I found it so overwhelming and so devastating. And all of these experiences that I was experiencing with this one individual were so piled on top of one another that I completely just shut down. Before this had happened, I was going into the lab around 9 a.m. and leaving at around 4 p.m. I did whatever it took. I was very passionate about things. I was, very joyful, very happy to be inside of this place doing this project. And the fact that I was doing a PhD at all was not something that I ever thought I would be able to do because of my background and how I'd grown up. I don't come from wealth in any way whatsoever. And I was also the first person in my family to go to university. So it really was all new and all exciting and all very opportunistic as well. And I felt so grateful to be the first person to do this, but also to be afforded these opportunities too. And so I was very passionate about this. I also wanted to do my best as well. This really changed after becoming so overwhelmed. I started to go to lab later and later every single day. And sometimes I wasn't able to actually start working until maybe 3 or 4 p.m. And I would go home much later. I wouldn't have a sleeping or eating schedule whatsoever. Everything just became so unhealthy. And on top of this, I'd lost all of my friends. There was no one in the lab at that time because, old students had graduated and new students weren't necessarily coming in either. And so I was alone at that time, both at home and both at work. And that's when I realized I'm wasting this opportunity that I had. I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my dreams. I'm wasting my life. I don't know what I'm doing. I hadn't actually heard of burnout, but I knew that something was wrong. I was just emotionally unable to cope. And so this is a part of the video where I kind of tell you what burnout is, because I understand that not everyone will know what it is. And I think it will be really useful to know, especially if you're experiencing extreme exhaustion in your life. I'm reading from my notes, but just so that I don't say anything wrong, because I'm not a psychologist in any way. So burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. It's caused by prolonged and excessive stress. So when you have stress, when you're feeling stressed and you're continuously feeling stressed every single day. And sometimes this can, be for different lengths of the day, but essentially what's happening is the stress is building up on you. It often occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. And so you are feeling as if you're unable to do all of these daily things. Usually it's just you feeling too exhausted and emotionally too overwhelmed to actually do anything. Burnout is very dangerous because it can actually last for a very long time. There are some ways to get through it, but usually the best way to get through burnout is through rest and essentially removing the stress source, which is much easier said than done. I completely understand. And yeah, I hope I've kind of explained that, but just in case, I've also left a link down below to help you with understanding burnout in a much better and much more professional way, because again, I'm not a professional. I'm just a person who experienced burnout, and yeah, you should not take any medical advice from me. At this point in my life, I realized that I was completely burned out. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know who to talk to, and I definitely couldn't afford to take time off. So I went to my supervisor and I told them what was happening and what was going on with me. And they advised that actually I was entitled to a couple of months of sick leave. And I went to my doctor. I got a note which was, detailing everything that I'd been through, and so that all sort of added up in a way. They were very supportive of me, and I took the time off, and what I did was just essentially rest, and I was trying my best to get better. However, I was not in a good situation at home. I wasn't able to essentially de-stress, which was what I needed. I needed to be away from my source of strain and stress. And so I didn't get better. I didn't get better in this time that I had. And I couldn't also go back to my PhD. I didn't know what I was doing. I was very scared, and I was very much worried about what I was going to be able to do for money as well, because I was supporting myself. No one else was. And so I had a meeting at the university, and I told them what was happening and discussed what my options were. And they essentially said, you can have the time off, but we're not going to be able to pay you anymore. So you're going to have to be able to find your own financial sources. So I went off. I worked as a lab tech for a little while, which was mostly just hands-on work. It didn't have the same sort of pressure on me as a PhD did. I had very similar skill sets, but it didn't have the aspect of this is my project and this is my degree, and I'm incredibly scared of getting this wrong. And so I worked that job for about 3 weeks, and then something happened. It was the very beginning of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. Everyone had to stay at home. I was terrified because the repercussion that this had on me was I lost that job. I was let go. They didn't need me. It was a temporary job. They wouldn't pay me any furlough, so I wasn't paid again. I had to find another job, and I had to find it very quickly because I didn't really have much savings. I was a PhD student, and you get minimum wage when you're a PhD student, so you've got to live off of that. And I was living in London, so it's quite expensive. I looked far and wide and I didn't know what I could do, so maybe I should just go back to my PhD. My supervisor got in touch with me and they said, actually, I'm sorting out some online material for new students in a summer school. Do you want to be a part of it? And I said, absolutely yes, because I was incredibly desperate at that point. I didn't know what I was going to do. I almost ran out of money for food, and I couldn't pay rent if I didn't say yes, for example. Actually, my supervisor already knew that I drew, and I was an illustrator as well on the side. So they asked me to make content for this course, which included some videos and some illustrations, some comics about science. And up until this day, I can't forget how absolutely lucky that was and how kind they were to do this. And I'm incredibly grateful for this as well. And so I spent the next 9 months at home making content and practicing drawing and making this money last as much as I could throughout those months, because I knew in my heart of hearts that I wouldn't be able to finish my PhD in this state. So I rested and I worked and I drew, and it was probably some of both the best of times and the worst of times as well, because there was this horrible thing happening, but there was also this very calming sense that art brought me, and I was able to draw about different science subjects, including there was this subject in particular that I was head of, which was tardigrades, and their ability to be sent to space and not die, because they do this sort of like chemical reaction inside of their bodies which enables them to just kind of like stay in a state of, you know, frozenness. And so I absolutely loved that, and I got to teach on the course as well. And then on the side I managed to pick up some tutoring as well. Through these months I made the pieces of joy that I got from art essentially just sustain me and keep me going. I owe it all essentially to this, to being able to pick that up, and to being able to also have been in a position of, there was a job that was able to pay me remotely and doing something that I loved. So by the end of those 9 months, I decided I was well enough to go back to my PhD and finish it. And it was very, very difficult. I was much better. I was able to come in on time, start on time, do experiments, move on. But it was really difficult because I was still experiencing a similar emotional stress and chronic fatigue and everything just under the sun. But I did it. And was it the best thing that I could have done? I have no idea. I don't know. I don't think it was. But sometimes you just have to do things, I think. And I felt this was the only opportunity that I would have to be able to get a PhD. Yeah, I didn't feel like I had any other options. Whether I did or didn't, I won't know. And I'm not going to sort of dwell on the past either. And I eventually got to the end of it. I produced a mass of information, and I then ran out of funding for my PhD because I'd passed, you know, the 4 years, and I had started to write up. I wrote my thesis in a month because that's all I could afford. That's all I had saved up in money, and I wasn't able to start my next job before I had submitted my thesis. So I wrote probably one of the worst theses that had ever been written in the world, and I submitted it because sometimes you just have to do things. Sometimes you just have to get things out, and you've got to leave perfection on the side, and you've just got to do it. I did it. I moved on. I started my new job, and things finally got better. My salary increased. I was no longer under the pressure of the PhD. I was able to move away from this place. I moved on. I made a new life for myself, and I was able to breathe again. I hadn't realized until I'd gone through all of these changes and all of this burnout and all of these bad moments that I wasn't able to breathe in those moments, like even physically. I had pressure on my chest the entire year, or couple of years that I'd been through this. And it wasn't until I'd finally been able to take things in my own hands and gain control that I could breathe again. I am now in a very, very different time, and I'm much better. I'm not burnt out anymore. I do go through ups and downs just like everyone, but I'm doing a job that I enjoy. I'm doing more art now, and I'm here with you guys. I've started a YouTube channel. I have no idea what the future can hold, but if there's something that I've learned about myself as well, is that I can trust myself. And so I'm coming to the end of this story, and I'm just sort of trying to bring some lessons that I've learned from it and from the experience itself. And I think the first and only one is it's okay to rest, and sometimes you absolutely must rest, especially if you're experiencing burnout. It is probably the only way you're going to get through it. That, and with some therapy. I'm a massive believer in therapy, so if you can get some, please get some. I wasn't able to afford it at the time, but I know there are more affordable options now, and if you can, go for them. I know that there are also some charities that offer reduced cost therapy for students as well. So if you're a student experiencing burnout and need some therapy, please look them up. They are there. I don't know what they are right now, but I'll also try and link some below as well. Your university might also have some therapy or some psychological or psychiatric help as well for you, and at least my one did. It's not always the case, but hopefully they will. Hold on if you're going through this, and reach out. I don't think I would have made it without asking for help. You need to recognize the signs of burnout, and you absolutely need to act on them, and the sooner the better, because the longer you leave it, the worse it gets. And something that I learned from this experience in particular is that there will be good days and there will be bad days, and in those bad days, that's when things will grow. So this is where I think I'm going to end this video. If you've gotten this far, I'd love to know what you've named these cats. I just want them to have names which suit their character. This one especially, he's a little bit more chonky than the others. So I hope you've enjoyed this story, but also maybe gotten something out of it. I know that when people talk about difficulties that they've had, that others might also find some hope in it and some relatability in it as well. Or that's definitely something that I experienced when I was going through this. I really looked on YouTube for someone that was going through the very similar thing, and I felt very comforted by the fact that I wasn't alone in that. And so if you are going through this, you're not alone. Loads of people experience burnout every year. Loads of people experience burnout during their PhD as well, because PhDs are incredibly stressful and you're doing an incredibly good job. So just keep going. I don't know if I've covered everything in this. I probably haven't. It's very late in the day and I'm just tired right now. If you were doing your dishes or drawing or doing some reading while you're listening to me, then I hope that brought you some joy and I kept you some company. Thank you for keeping me company. Thank you for being here. I'm actually really dumbfounded by the fact that anyone watches these videos at all, because they're so therapeutic for me to make as well. I'd also love to get to know you a little bit better as well, and so if you have a story about your university experience or going through a terrible time with burnout and now you're on the other side, I'd love to hear about that and what you did. And yeah, let's just all be friends in the comment section. Anyway, I'm going to go because I think my recording time has been over 40 minutes and this is going to take me forever to edit. But I hope you have a lovely time wherever you are and stay safe and take care. Okay, bye. Dreaming of the ocean as I swim above a riverbed. Life is so fraudulent. Towel off my guilt as I